Sometimes the desire to create a family and be loved can have quite adverse consequences. Ellie's dreams of a happy future were shattered one dark night on the remote shore of Lake Sardis. Despite the party at the bar being in full swing, Ellie Costell, a 21-year-old University of Mississippi student, hurriedly prepared to head home. Her girlfriends tried to persuade her to stay a bit longer, but the young woman remained adamant. Stepping outside, she immediately pulled her mobile phone from her purse and texted someone that she would be there soon. Ellie was very excited about the upcoming meeting, as today, one could say, her destiny was being decided. The young woman didn't yet know that this night would be her last. She hailed a taxi and, after giving the address of her apartment, happily rode home. This story will serve as a warning to many young people who haven't yet learned to solve their problems independently. It's crucial for parents to explain to their child that no matter what happens, they can always count on support from mom and dad in everything. Alexandria Madison Kostial, or Ellie as her loved ones called her, was born September 11, 1997, to parents Cindy and Keith. She grew up alongside her younger brother Andrew in St. Louis, Missouri. From childhood, Ellie was the most optimistic child, literally radiating love and joy through her entire demeanor. The girl treated strangers with the same warmth and kindness that she showed when interacting with her family. Ellie was one of those people who instantly lifted spirits just by their presence and genuine smile. Friends described Ellie as a light that never ceased to shine. Ellie was not only a wonderful daughter, sister, and friend, but also a successful athlete and gifted student. From 2012 to 2016, she was a member of the track and field team, and golf team, youth government support group, and National Honor Society. She had time for everything. Outside of school and sporting events, Ellie also enjoyed yoga and participated in half marathons. During school breaks, the young woman traveled as a volunteer to Peru and Africa to help small children learn to speak English. Don't be afraid to be who you are. This was the core principle that Ellie lived by and encouraged others to follow the same advice. She accepted people with all their character traits, was an incredibly loyal friend, and wasn't afraid to show her true nature. It was for all these qualities that people loved Ellie. They simply felt comfortable around her. After finishing high school, Ellie enrolled in the University of Mississippi's Ole Miss College in Oxford. This was what she had dreamed of since childhood, and the dream had finally come true. There were several reasons why she had always wanted to go there. First, Ellie was drawn to the preppy style that the school offered. This was a distinctive fashion style that originated from the uniforms of prestigious private school students, preparing to enter elite higher education institutions. The young woman loved the color pink and adored pearls. She was enchanted when the sun would sink below the horizon and illuminate the sky with rosy reflections. Ellie even created a social media page dedicated to sunsets, which she constantly photographed. Of course, she had other more significant reasons why she loved the University of Mississippi and wanted to study there. She appreciated the college's own traditions. She was fond of the distinguished professors, the overall atmosphere, and the presence of a major football team. Ellie enrolled at Ole Miss in fall 2016. Her aspirations extended far beyond obtaining a specialization in business and marketing. The young woman wanted to finally achieve results not only in terms of her career, but also in finding personal happiness. She thought college was the perfect place to meet her future life partner. Besides studying, Ellie also decided to join the Alpha Kappa Psi Women's Club and the business community. She founded and led a golf club and in her free time taught yoga and Pilates. Naturally, her day was scheduled down to the minute, but most importantly, her studies didn't suffer. The only thing Ellie lacked was a boyfriend. Many high school students, when entering college, dream of meeting someone there with whom they'll continue through life. Ellie dreamed of the same things as most of her peers. She loved Southern boys and Southern culture and hoped that studying in Mississippi would help her find a young man with whom she would spend the rest of her life, have a successful marriage, create a happy family, and have her own children. In high school, Ellie had boys she was in love with, but there was never anything serious between them. Even to the prom, she went not accompanied by a date, but paired with a girlfriend. And finally, Ellie's dream came true. She got a boyfriend. It was her classmate, Brandon Thiesfeld, a freshman from Fort Worth, Texas. Ellie fell for him instantly, and throughout their freshman year at Ole Miss, they spent a lot of time together. The young woman invited him to most parties organized by her sorority. Although many said that Ellie and Brandon dated occasionally, they were never officially boyfriend and girlfriend, never arranged dates for each other, and never planned to spend their lives together. There were even times when the young man would block his friend's number for several weeks, or even months. The fact was that both students viewed the relationship completely differently. Ellie liked the guy from the moment they first met. She thought the attraction was mutual. Ellie probably wanted more than just companionship. She hoped that one day everything would change and Brandon would see in her that special someone to walk through life with. Ellie dreamed of officially becoming his girlfriend, graduating college, and someday marrying him. However, from Brandon's perspective, this was just a casual, intimate relationship. He was a different type of person, usually called a player. He had several girls simultaneously and made each one think their connection would grow into something more, though in reality, he simply didn't want serious relationships. Brandon was an extremely manipulative person who clearly kept Ellie around to satisfy his intimate fantasies. He was well aware that the girl liked him and used this to his advantage. To explain why they couldn't be together, he would say he wasn't good enough for her. The couple's relationship resembled an emotional roller coaster. One minute, Ellie could be very excited and happy, and the next, she would be upset and crying. Brandon never visited her home and wasn't familiar with most of her friends. Many hadn't even heard his surname, so all that Ellie's close friends knew was what she told them. And apparently, Ellie kept much to herself. She rarely told anyone about what was really happening between them. Facing Brandon's manipulations, Ellie often felt lonely. Earlier, the young woman shared absolutely everything with her mother, Cindy. The woman knew her daughter liked a young man from her course, and although Ellie continued to confide in her mother, she never spoke about her relationship with Brandon. People in love often see situations in a completely different light. Ellie probably didn't even realize that Brandon was manipulating her. She noticed only good things in every person. Ellie looked at the world through rose-colored glasses. This didn't mean she was foolish. She was only 19 years old. She was away from her parents for the first time, and for the first time received attention from a boy she liked. Though the love-struck Ellie continued to pursue Brandon, in what happened to her, she bears no blame whatsoever. Let's move to summer 2019, when Ellie was approaching her final year of college. She had turned 21 and spent the entire summer living on campus. She attended summer classes, engaged in extracurricular activities, and spent time with friends on campus. In early July, her parents came to visit her. The young woman was overjoyed to spend time with them. They worked together to set up her new apartment off campus. They went shopping, prepared home-cooked meals, and enjoyed each other's company. Ellie missed them so much that she begged Mom and Dad to stay at least one more day. But her parents needed to return to St. Louis. Her mother, Cindy, later recalled that saying goodbye to her daughter that time was particularly difficult, though the parents had no idea it would be the last time in their lives. Nevertheless, Ellie called them regularly to chat and share news. On July 19, 2019, the young woman once again dialed their home number. It was around 7 in the evening. Actually, Ellie had just woken up. She had an important test in the morning, so she had studied extensively the night before and then fallen asleep during the day. She told her mom that later that evening she planned to meet friends at a bar. Overall, it was a completely ordinary conversation with no signs of the impending tragedy. Mom Cindy couldn't even imagine that she was talking to her daughter for the last time. And in just a few hours, their life would change forever. Later that night, at 11:52 p.m., cameras at one of the businesses on Oxford Square recorded Ellie Costell leaving the bar alone. She could be seen looking at her phone screen while walking in the opposite direction from the establishment. Later, a taxi picked her up, and the driver safely delivered Ellie home after midnight. But she was already in danger at that point, because the plan for her destruction had been set in motion. On the morning of July 20th, 2019, a Lafayette County deputy sheriff was conducting routine patrol in Harmontown near Lake Sardis, located 30 miles north of the Ole Miss campus. It was there, at an abandoned fishing spot by the water, that a standard patrol turned into a crime investigation. At 10:23 a.m., the officer stumbled upon the body of a young woman. It was clear that she had been shot multiple times. The officer could no longer do anything to save her. Very soon, the victim was identified as 21-year-old Ole Miss college student Alexandria Kostial. Later, the medical examiner determined that she had been shot a total of 9 times. This was the cause of her death. It all happened while the young woman was sitting on a picnic bench, and the shots were fired from different directions, as if the perpetrator was walking in a circle. At the crime scene, investigators found 11 spent shell casings, as well as Ellie's purse, discarded in a ditch near where her body lay. Inside, they found her student ID and driver's license, which helped police quickly identify the victim. Additionally, this gave them an idea of where she lived. Officers contacted Ellie's friends and family, searched her apartment, and the only item they couldn't locate was the victim's mobile phone. Police tried to ping its location via GPS and only received a point in Oxford. Fortunately, Ellie wore an Apple Watch that synchronized with her mobile. The watch was found in her apartment and gave detectives a lead for further investigation. Text messages coming to the mobile phone were duplicated on the electronic watch, so investigators were able to determine who the young woman had been messaging before her death. It was a single person, her classmate, 22-year-old Brandon Theisfeld. Moreover, they weren't just texting that evening, but arranging to meet after Ellie left the bar, leaving her friends to continue having fun. If the messages themselves weren't enough to indicate the guy's involvement in the student's murder, when talking with Ellie's friends, the boyfriend's name came up first when they were asked who might want to harm Ellie, while Brandon's roommate described him as an arrogant misogynist who often made vulgar, crude comments about female classmates. All signs pointed to Brandon, so investigators called him and asked him to come to the police station to answer a few questions. The guy agreed but didn't show up for questioning at the appointed time. When they called him again, he explained that he had drunk too much the night before, so he didn't want to meet with detectives while intoxicated. When Ellie's case investigators scheduled a meeting for the next morning, Brandon agreed, but again failed to appear at the station at the appointed time. Officers quickly discovered that this time Brandon had gone on the run. They obtained a warrant for his arrest and declared him wanted. Operatives managed to track the movement of Brandon's mobile phone and his credit card transactions. Through these records, police learned that the student was heading toward Memphis, Tennessee. A description of Brandon's vehicle was sent to the Memphis Police Department's fugitive task force. And that same evening, the guy was arrested when he stopped at a gas station. This happened just 3 days after Ellie's death. In his pickup truck was a .40 caliber pistol, matching the weapon used to shoot Ellie. Brandon himself had blood on his shirt, although the student insisted on his innocence and maintained he wasn't involved in Ellie's death. Police ultimately charged him with murder. After his arrest, the young man was extradited back to Mississippi, where he was held without bail. He refused to talk without a lawyer. Investigators decided to track Brandon's actions on the weekend when Ellie was killed. They learned that the guy had met with friends, the students went bowling together. Everything was very ordinary. On Sunday, Brandon came to a friend's house with a pistol. There was nothing unusual about this either. He brought a six-pack of beer. They drank and did some target practice at empty cans. When his friend woke up the next morning, Brandon was already gone. Brandon had a life full of promise. He was raised in a good Christian family and received lots of love. His parents worked as doctors. His father owned his own clinic. It seemed the guy had a typical Texas childhood. Brandon enjoyed spending time outdoors, hunting, fishing. In school, he played football and was never noticed showing any violence. The young man had never even gotten into a single fight. Soon after enrolling at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Brandon met Ellie at a bar. It was immediately clear to anyone that Ellie liked Brandon much more than he liked her. Their relationship became complicated when both were sophomores. Due to the large number of messages from Ellie that she wrote to him, the guy even blocked her phone number. But then something changed, and these two started communicating again. Meanwhile, as the investigation continued, more than 100 people gathered to honor the memory of Ally Kostial. Many people said that she was a true bright light in their lives, and now that light had gone out, but it would continue to shine in each of their hearts. This sweet girl clearly didn't deserve what happened to her. After the vigil on July 27, 2019, a funeral was held at Concordia Lutheran Church, where all of Ellie's close ones and relatives gathered again to bid the young woman a final farewell. They all wondered who could have been threatened by the cheerful, positive student, and the answer was clear: Brandon Theisfeld. On July 23rd, Brandon first appeared in court, where he was officially charged with Ellie's murder. But how could a love-struck student have threatened the guy so much that he dared to commit such a vile crime? Investigators hoped to find answers to some questions in the hundreds of text messages between the young people. The reason turned out to be much sadder than anyone could have imagined. It turned out that in April 2019, just 3 months before her death, Ellie was preparing for her spring semester final exams. What neither her family nor friends knew was that the student was focused on another type of test, a pregnancy test. Ellie wrote to Brandon that she was late and suspected a certain situation. The first message about this was sent on April 12th, to which the guy asked her to keep this information secret from friends and parents for now. 2 days later, Ellie sent Brandon a photo of a pregnancy test. The fact was that the test could be called neither positive nor negative. The second line was barely visible, and the situation could be interpreted differently. Along with the pregnancy test photo, Ellie also quite reasonably asked if they could meet in person to talk. At first, the young man ignored Ellie's message completely, but when he did respond, he was clear and concise in his decision. Brandon took this news categorically. Not only did he have no intention of meeting with Ellie, but he also expressed his specific desire. If the girl actually turned out to be pregnant, he wanted her to fix the situation immediately, suggesting she take a pill. 22-year-old Brandon clearly stated that he didn't want to have a child at all because it would ruin his life. He wasn't going to help Ellie if she decided to keep the baby. And even if it seemed like a harsh and cruel decision to her, he would never change his mind. Brandon was adamant in his conviction and kept telling Ellie again and again from April through August that he didn't want to tie his future life to hers. But the young woman only asked for a meeting and a face-to-face conversation. He continued to avoid her, and eventually, communication was reduced to just electronic messages. Several times they set up dates, but each time the guy canceled at the last minute and didn't show up. Ellie, despite the ambiguous test result, continued writing to Brandon day and night. Many of her messages were long, candid, and quite disturbing. Finding herself in a difficult situation, Ellie was afraid to tell her parents about it and tried as best she could to hide from her pain and confusion about what to do next. According to her messages, the young woman even tried to drink a large amount of alcohol to end all her torment at once. At one point, she wrote that she had drunk a full bottle of tequila and 2 bottles of champagne, 7 cans of beer, and a glass of wine. Ellie wanted to get alcohol poisoning, and although it became clear to any reasonable person that she was clearly exaggerating, at the same time, this was a kind of cry for help and support from someone close to her. This showed how desperately she needed his attention and support from Brandon. However, instead of this, Brandon continued to coldly state that he didn't want this child and repeatedly refused to meet Ellie in person. He didn't care what was happening to her. Such behavior said a lot about his character. In reality, Brandon was only interested in himself. Many considered him a daddy's boy because the guy constantly flaunted the fact that his father's money could get him out of any trouble. Only this time, he was badly mistaken. When it came to evidence against Brandon, there was plenty. Besides the bullet casings matching his pistol, blood on his shirt, and text messages confirming that he and Ellie did meet that night, there was also a letter. After the arrest, police searched Brandon's apartment and found a handwritten message to the guy's parents. In this letter, he didn't directly confess to the murder, but indirectly spoke about the committed crime. Brandon was troubled by what he had done. He wrote to his mother and father that he was a bad person, but it wasn't the parents' fault. He had always been visited by terrible thoughts, fueled by alcohol and prohibited substances, and for him, this was the end. He would either go to prison or die. The guy felt that he would be caught sooner or later anyway. Later, Brandon's lawyer stated that this was Brandon's suicide note, and that after killing Ellie, he had planned to take his own life as well. But the attempt was unsuccessful. Allegedly, the guy had already put the gun to his head, and then lost consciousness. However, regardless of the letter's purpose, it was just one piece of evidence indicating his guilt. During the investigation, detectives uncovered several other things indicating that the crime was planned in advance. A week before Ellie's death, on Friday, July 12th, Brandon traveled from Oxford to Fort Worth to his parents' house to retrieve his pistol. He photographed the weapon and posted it on his account with the caption, "Finally bringing my baby back to Oxford." The investigators also reviewed Brandon's internet search history and discovered truly frightening queries. In the week leading up to Ellie's murder, the student had Googled how to get away with committing a crime, how to plan a murder, how to tie people up, and how to lure them into a trap. He also searched for tactical face masks, full metal jacket ammunition, and gun silencers. And the most horrifying thing was that he actually managed to lure his victim by deception, making Ellie think he was finally ready to talk about the pregnancy. Brandon's lawyer insisted that the internet search history still didn't prove that Brandon planned to shoot Ellie. And there was an innocent explanation for why his client brought a gun with him to Mississippi. In his opinion, there was nothing unusual about people shooting. There were ranges in Oxford where the student wanted to practice shooting, but prosecutors were clear that Brandon's trip to Texas and computer searches were part of a carefully crafted plan. On July 17, 2019, Brandon initiated a conversation with Ellie for the first time since April. He pretended he wanted to talk about the pregnancy situation. On Thursday, July 18th, shortly before 2 a.m., Ellie sent Brandon a message with a photo of her belly. For the guy, this message could have been the last straw. He became so frightened that he decided to immediately execute his plan and permanently eliminate the problem. That day, Brandon asked if Ellie's friends would be around when he visited her. The young woman thought he wanted to maintain confidentiality because it was a very delicate topic for discussion, and happily and nervously agreed to meet without witnesses. She felt enormous relief that they were finally going to talk about her pregnancy. But in reality, Brandon merely wanted to ensure that Ellie would be home alone and no one would guess that she had left with him. Eventually, on the 19th, he confirmed the time once more. The young people agreed to meet after Ellie returned home from the bar. She promised to leave early so that no one would interrupt their conversation. Brandon's truck with its distinctive license plate was spotted on surveillance footage driving toward Ellie's house at 1:14 a.m. The same camera recorded the vehicle when it was moving in the opposite direction. GPS data showed that Ellie's and Brandon's mobile phones were close to each other as they drove through Oxford toward Lake Sardis. On the previous day, the young man had been drinking all day, and after arriving at the location, he continued hitting the bottle. He and Ellie sat at a picnic table talking about her pregnancy. Brandon had some white powder in his car. Getting angry about the conversation, he went to his truck and used the substance, after which he returned to the table with a pistol in his hand and began shooting. Ellie was shot at least 9 times in total, with 1 bullet lodging in the table. Witnesses heard several shots in the vicinity between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m. And at 10:03 a.m., according to GPS, both mobile phones returned toward Oxford. Then less than an hour later, Brandon searched the internet for information about how to monitor police channels, after which he tried to find news related to Lake Sardis, Mississippi. Over the next few hours, both mobiles pinged from the same towers until Ellie's phone eventually lost signal. Apparently, Brandon turned off the device and disposed of it, while he meanwhile went to hang out with friends, drink beer, and show off his pistol as if nothing terrible had happened. Fortunately, he soon faced the consequences of his actions. By August 2019, Brandon's name made front-page news. That's when the case was presented to the grand jury, and everyone was shocked by what happened. University professors, students, and ordinary Oxford residents. On August 22nd, Brandon appeared in court for a bail hearing. However, his lawyer ultimately withdrew the request and instead asked the judge to order a psychological evaluation for his client. Apparently, the lawyer decided to slow down the case by presenting Brandon as someone with mental health issues to reduce his sentence for the crime. The judge approved both requests. This meant he would continue to hold Brandon in jail without bail, and also order a psychological assessment of his condition. And outside the courtroom, Ellie's devastated loved ones and friends gathered. They continued to do this until justice prevailed. The Kostial family deeply grieved the loss of their daughter. After her tragic death, parents Cindy and Keith refused to read Ellies Messages with Brandon discovered by investigators because they blamed themselves for not noticing their child's emotional torment and overlooking her dire situation. But it would have been even more painful for them to read how heartlessly the guy their daughter was in love with treated her. While Ellie's friends and family waited for Brandon Theisfeld to face trial for his crime, prosecutors built their case. They hoped the text messages between the students could provide insight into what might have led to the young woman's death. About a week later, on August 30th, 2019, Brandon returned to court where he was formally charged with the kidnapping of Alexandria Kostial and murder punishable by death penalty in Mississippi. The psychological evaluation found the student sane and competent to stand trial. Ultimately, the defendant pleaded not guilty, despite all the evidence against him. By that time, 2020 had arrived, and due to the pandemic, there were serious delays in the judicial system, so his trial had to be postponed. By the time it finally took place, Brandon had changed his mind and decided to take a plea deal. On August 27, 2021, Brandon pleaded guilty to taking Alexandria Kostial's life in exchange for a lighter sentence. State authorities agreed to reduce his punishment, knowing that securing a death sentence would be much more difficult and require far more evidence. So the former student will have to spend his entire life behind bars. When it came to the motive for the crime, Brandon's lawyer stated that his client was driven by a desire to eliminate the problem. Brandon thought he would become a father and wanted to end it in his own way. His intention was aggravated by the fact that he was drunk and under the influence of prohibited substances. However, this did not elicit sympathy from the jury. The most terrible thing about this story is that the results of the home pregnancy tests that Ellie showed Brandon were inconclusive. One clearly visible line and a second barely noticeable one. The situation could be interpreted in 2 ways, but Ellie's autopsy report gave a definitive result. The young woman was not pregnant. Unfortunately, no one will ever know if Ellie could have been pregnant several months before her death. According to a text message she sent Brandon in early July, Ellie said she had bleeding. It's quite possible she had a miscarriage due to the stress she endured. Perhaps the young woman so desperately wanted to marry her loved one that she took wishful thinking for reality. But if Ellie could have known that Brandon was capable of taking her life just to avoid responsibility for the consequences of their intimate relationship, she would hardly have insisted on meeting and would never have voluntarily gotten into his truck.